Welcome to another deep dive with us. We're going to be tackling a big one today. We're looking at literacy and math instruction time
Oh, interesting.
and asking the question, is there an optimal amount of time? Is there some sort of magic number we should be shooting for in primary and secondary school?
Yeah.
It's a fascinating topic, especially because some of the research suggests more time spent teaching doesn't actually always equal better results.
Yeah, it's kind of counterintuitive, isn't it?
And totally, and that's what we're going to be digging into today.
Yeah.
We've got reports from the OECD, PIRLS and TIMSS assessments.
Okay.
And we'll also be drawing on some insights from Dr. Paul Treffner's draft paper. Really interesting stuff.
I've read that paper, yeah. Some really provocative ideas in there.
Yeah, definitely. So, are you ready to dive in?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay. So let's just start by setting the stage.
Yeah.
How much time are countries actually dedicating to literacy and math instruction? What's the global landscape look like?
Well, the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, they collect a ton of data on education systems worldwide.
Right.
And their reports actually reveal a huge global variation in how much time countries allocate to teaching these subjects.
Okay.
On average, primary schools are spending about 50% more time on literacy than math. Think about that. If you took your average TV show, that's how much time some countries are dedicating just to reading instruction each day.
Wow, that really puts it into perspective.
Yeah, it's quite a chunk of the school day.
So what about math? Does it catch up at the secondary level, or what's the deal?
The gap does narrow significantly as students move into high school.
Okay.
Literacy instruction drops a bit while the time spent on math stays relatively consistent.
Got it.
So, yeah, it evens out somewhat. But that initial difference in primary school is pretty striking.
Okay, so we've got this sort of global picture. Now let's zoom in a little bit on how we're doing right here in New Zealand. Where do we fit into all of this?
Right. Well, that's where it gets a little tricky. New Zealand doesn't actually report its data to the OECD, so we have to piece things together from other sources.
Ah, I see. So it's like detective work.
Exactly. But from what we can gather, it seems New Zealand puts a big emphasis on literacy instruction. They're spending up to a third longer than the average of comparable countries. For math, we're closer to the international average.
So we're dedicating a lot of time to literacy, even more than the global average, which already favors literacy over math.
Yeah, that's right.
But hang on a second. Didn't you say earlier that more time doesn't always equal better results?
I did say that, yes.
So if that's the case, how do New Zealand students actually perform compared to other countries? I mean, are we seeing a payoff for all this extra time or what?
Well, that's where we get to the paradox. You see, when we look at PRS, that's the Progress in International Reading Literacy Study, and TIMSS, the Trends in International Mathematics and Science Study, there's no clear-cut positive link between instruction time and how well students do on these tests.
So all that extra time dedicated to literacy, and we're not necessarily seeing a huge payoff.
It appears that way.
That's surprising. I mean, you'd think with all that extra time we'd be at the top of the charts or something.
You would, wouldn't you? But it's just not that simple.
Okay, so spill the beans. What's going on here?
Well, get this. At the primary level, there are some weak but noticeable negative correlations between instruction time and reading scores.
Wait, back up a second. Negative correlations. You're saying that sometimes countries spending less time actually outperform those spending more?
Precisely. It's counterintuitive, but that's what the data suggests.
Okay, now my mind is officially blown. Give me some examples. Which countries are we talking about here? Who's doing this less is more thing and rocking it?
Think Scandinavia, Finland, Norway, Sweden. They consistently score highly in reading, despite dedicating less time to formal instruction.
Interesting.
They're spending, on average, about 34 to 42 minutes per day on reading instruction.
Yeah.
Compared to New Zealand's 68 minutes.
Wow, that's almost half the time in some cases. And yet their students are excelling. It makes you wonder what they're doing differently within that shorter time frame, doesn't it? Have they cracked some kind of secret code for effective teaching?
It's tempting to think so, right?
Yeah.
But we have to be careful not to jump to conclusions.
Right, of course.
It's important to remember we're dealing with correlational data here. We can't assume a direct cause and effect relationship.
That's a good point. Correlation doesn't equal causation.
Exactly. However, these findings definitely challenge that more is better assumption.
For sure.
They force us to take a closer look at how that time is actually being used in the classroom. Like, what are these high-performing countries doing differently? What can we learn from them?
That's a great question. It's not just about the quantity of time, but the quality of instruction within that time, which leads to another question.
Yeah.
How much time is enough? I mean, if more isn't always better, is there a sweet spot, some kind of Goldilocks zone for teaching literacy and math?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And while there are no easy answers, PISA data offers some intriguing clues.
Oh, tell me more.
PISA, by the way, stands for the Program for International Student Assessment. It's another one of those big international studies.
Got it.
And their research suggests a potential sweet spot for reading instruction at the secondary level, somewhere between 36 and 48 minutes per day.
Wait, is that sweet spot the same for every student? I mean, what about kids who need more support or those who are already ahead? Wouldn't a one-size-fits-all approach leave some students behind?
You've hit on a crucial point there.
Yeah.
Of course, this sweet spot is just an average, based on large-scale data.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean every student will thrive within that exact time frame.
Of course.
Individual learning styles and needs definitely come into play. And it's crucial to recognize that teaching methods matter just as much as the time allocated.
Right.
But on average, beyond that 48-minute mark, the gains in reading seem to plateau or even decline.
That's fascinating. It actually reminds me of my own learning experiences. Sometimes spending too much time on a topic actually made it harder to absorb. Like, my brain would just shut down from information overload. Have you ever experienced that?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Sometimes less is more, right? You got to focus. It makes you engage more deeply. But let's shift gears a little bit. We've been talking a lot about this whole quantity of time thing.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling like what happens during that instruction time is even more important, right?
Absolutely. Like, time is just one piece of the puzzle, right? What matters more is what happens within that time. Treffner's research, it really shines a light on this.
Oh, interesting.
He emphasizes factors like curriculum design, teaching methods, how engaged students are, and even the teacher's own expertise in the subject.
So it's not just about ticking boxes on a timetable.
Right.
It's about creating a learning environment where those minutes are like maximized.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, good teaching, sure, that matters. But are we saying like time isn't important at all?
No.
That seems a bit extreme.
Yeah, it's not about saying time is irrelevant.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that it's one factor among many and not always the most important one.
Okay.
Think of it this way. Like, you could have a beautifully designed car with a powerful engine, but if you don't know how to drive it properly, you won't get very far.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
Same applies to teaching. You can have ample time allocated, but if the teaching methods aren't effective, those minutes won't translate into meaningful learning.
I like that. That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
It really highlights that interplay between time and teaching methods.
Right.
Are there any specific examples from the research that kind of illustrate this point? Something that would really bring this idea to life for our listeners.
There's a fascinating finding from the 2016 PIRLS data.
Okay.
Remember, PIRLS focuses specifically on reading, right?
Well, they found that New Zealand students rarely read aloud in class, a practice that's actually more common in those higher performing English language countries we were talking about.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So even though we're spending more time on reading instruction, the activities within that time might not be hitting the mark?
That seems to be the case, yeah.
That's interesting.
It really underscores how those pedagogical choices, the decisions teachers make about how to teach, can dramatically impact outcomes.
Right.
Regardless of the time allocated.
Yeah.
It raises the question, if you were designing the ideal literacy or math lesson, what elements would you prioritize?
Ooh, good question.
What would make those minutes truly count?
I mean, that's a great question for our listeners to ponder as well.
Right.
What would your dream lesson look like?
Exactly.
But before we get too carried away with lesson planning and all that, we've been talking mostly about primary and secondary education in this deep dive.
What about early childhood education?
Yeah.
What does the research say about instruction time in those crucial formative years?
Yeah.
Say ages 2 to 7.
That's actually a significant gap in our knowledge.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Treffner's research, he actually highlights this, the lack of international data on teaching time in early childhood settings.
Wow.
So we just don't have the same level of insight into how much time is dedicated to literacy and math at that age.
So we're kind of missing a big piece of the puzzle.
We are.
If we're trying to understand the optimal path for literacy and math development, we need to know what's happening in those early years.
Right.
I mean, those foundations are so crucial.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it raises an important question, one that goes beyond just data points and timetables.
Yeah.
How much emphasis should we be placing on formal literacy and math instruction in early childhood versus fostering a love of learning and exploration more broadly? Are we pushing too much too soon, or are we missing a critical window of opportunity? It's a really complex issue. No easy answers there.
It definitely makes you think.
Yeah.
It seems like there's a lot more research needed in this area.
Yeah, for sure.
But going back to this idea of optimal instruction time, I'm curious about Treffner's argument that we need to think about time in a more dynamic way.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Sure. Treffner suggests that instead of getting hung up on, minutes on a timetable,
Right.
we should think of time as a series of events that make up the learning experience.
Oh, okay.
It's less about the clock and more about what's happening within that time.
I see.
He calls these teaching events. And they can happen anywhere, not just within the four walls of a classroom.
So it's more organic.
Yeah, exactly.
So instead of rigidly allocating, say, 45 minutes to math every day,
Right.
we should be designing these learning experiences that might flow more organically, adapting to students' needs and the content itself.
Exactly.
That sounds pretty revolutionary.
It is a shift in perspective, that's for sure.
Yeah.
These teaching events could involve connections to other subjects, bringing in real-world applications, maybe even project-based learning, or simply tailoring the instruction to match the pace and style of individual learners.
So we need to be flexible and responsive with time.
Yes.
Rather than treating it as this fixed, finite commodity.
Yeah, like that.
In education, right? It's
Yeah.
It's about recognizing those aha moments, those sparks of learning that can happen throughout the day.
Exactly, yeah.
Right, not just within a 45-minute block.
And it's interesting to note that New Zealand's current curriculum refresh seems to be echoing this idea.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're emphasizing optimal teaching methods and content through what they call the common practice model.
Yeah, can you remind our listeners what the common practice model is all about?
Sure.
I'm not sure everyone's totally up to speed on the ins and outs of our curriculum changes.
It's essentially a framework designed to support teachers in making those effective pedagogical choices we've been talking about.
Yay.
It provides guidelines and resources to help teachers create engaging learning environments that go beyond simply clocking in minutes.
So instead of dictating a specific number of minutes for each subject,
Yeah.
the curriculum refresh is really focusing on building a foundation
Yes.
of effective teaching practices.
Right.
They're recognizing that time will be shaped by those choices
Exactly.
rather than the other way around.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
It does. It does.
It really does.
But a promising shift.
Yeah.
It suggests a move away from that more is always better mindset
Right.
and towards a more nuanced understanding of how time interacts with other factors in education.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, it sounds like New Zealand's on the right track with all this.
Yeah, it's definitely a step in the right direction. And it aligns with this growing body of research that suggests we need to be looking beyond simply adding more time to the school day,
Right.
The real key to improving literacy and math outcomes, it lies in supporting teachers, investing in those evidence-based practices we've been talking about, and creating these engaging learning environments where students actually feel empowered to explore and discover,
Yeah.
Yeah. It's about fostering that love of learning.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive.
We have.
It's amazing how much there is to consider when it comes to education, right?
It's a huge topic, isn't it?
It is. It really is.
So many factors at play.
But before we wrap things up, I want to just bring it back to that mind-blowing idea we started with.
Okay.
There's no magic number when it comes to instruction time.
Right.
It's so much more than just the quantity of time, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's about those quality interactions.
Yeah.
Those moments of connection between a teacher and their students. It's about creating those aha moments.
Yeah.
Those sparks of understanding that can happen in, a fleeting instant or build gradually over time.
Yeah.
And recognizing that each student learns differently. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
No magic formula for success.
And that kind of brings us to our final thought-provoking question for you, dear listener.
Okay, hit us with it.
Imagine you're in a position to advise those policymakers, the people who make decisions about education, knowing what you know now, knowing that simply adding more time to the school day isn't the answer. What would you suggest? Where should the focus lie if we truly want to improve literacy and math education?
I love that question.
Yeah.
Really gets you thinking, doesn't it? It encourages us to think beyond those simplistic solutions.
For sure.
And grapple with the complexity of education. There's no easy fix, but by understanding the nuances, by challenging those long-held assumptions, we can start to create a system that truly nurtures a love of learning, in all its forms.
Well said. Keep those brains buzzing, fellow deep divers. And don't forget to check out the resources mentioned in this episode if you want to explore these ideas further. Until next time, happy learning.